Hello and welcome to a new reading vlog. So after having reread A Nameless Witch last vlog, it's very similar to Nettle and Bone, so if you like that, you would like A Nameless Witch, I thought, why not read some books I've read before and see if they still stack up, because I ended up loving A Nameless Witch even more than I had originally. So this week is a week of rereads. So the first book I chose to reread was The Shadow of the Wind. So I originally read this in 2009 and I'd given it 5 stars. And it's a book that I did recommend as a librarian quite a lot for anyone wanting a mystery. So I thought, let's check it out and see if it still holds up. So this book is about a young man whose father takes him to a place called the Cemetery of Forgotten Books. And he gets to pick one book. And he picks a book by an author called Julian Carax. And he is so enamored with the story, which is also a mystery, that he wants to find out more about the author. But alas, the author's own life is also enshrouded in mystery. So this is a book with a lot of twists and turns, a lot of connections, some that you can see coming and some you can absolutely not see coming. Before I tell you my personal opinion of it now, I'll read my original review of it. It has been far too long since I last read a book that I was simply unable to put down. I am so happy I found this. The plot is complex and full of murder, love, friendship, betrayal, and everything in between. At times, I did find myself wanting to rush through just to get to the end and know the truth, but it is worth the wait. Some books finish terribly and leave you irritated and feeling robbed of your time. This ending left me satisfied without taking anything away from the long journey I had just been on. The writing captures your attention, as do the well-written characters, each with their own distinct voice. Although there is happiness in this novel, I felt it was still enshrouded with sorrow. At times, the descriptions may become a little repetitive in all their gloominess, but I still found that the story was fluid and kept you interested. I hadn't heard of this book. I happened to read a short blurb which mentioned a cemetery of forgotten books, and that idea alone grabbed my attention. Overall, it isn't going to become a classic great, but it is an entertaining read. And then I said my favourite line, there are too many to list, but here is one example. My father sighed, hiding behind the sad smile that followed him like a shadow through his life. First of all, I really put in the effort and did some extra work. These days it's very simple, and that's because I have this channel, so I keep my good reviews very brief, normally just one sentence, so I can look back and know, did I like this, did I not like it? I am not as enamored with it now. So my previous rating was 5 stars. I'm going to keep it at that. However, this read around, I gave it 4.5. I didn't find the writing as phenomenal as I had previously. It's got a bit of a weird cadence to it. The rhythm is a bit odd, but it is easy to read. I still feel like it could have been edited down a little bit to improve the flow, but it is just as twisty and turny. And even though I remembered a little bit of the story, I didn't recall all of the events, so I was still stunned and shocked and scandalized by some of the turn of events in the book. However, I do still find it entertaining. This is mostly about the plot and the connections for me in this story. That's what the most enjoyable part of it is. The characters themselves, I didn't particularly like any of them. And I did find some of the men a little sexist, a little lecherous, to be honest, but I know maybe it was a product of the times as well. Is it a good book? I would say it's still a good book. And it's probably one I would still recommend to someone who wants a bit of a mystery. That being said, there is violence, there are deaths, so it's not chaste in that respect. And I do think it's still infused with sorrow. I wouldn't call it a happy book by any stretch of the imagination. But I am glad that I picked it for a reread. It was still a great time. 4.5 stars, it's still fantastic. And it is still one that I would recommend. I think this series does continue on. I, however, have no desire to continue it on. I feel like it wraps up in a way that leaves you satisfied at finishing it. But yes, so that was The Shadow of the Wind. So the next book that I picked up is A Monster Calls. I originally read this in 2012 and I just left the review. I loved this. I gave it 5 stars. This book is a middle grade. but adults can definitely read this. I can see why it's middle grade, because the main protagonist is a young boy and their mother is currently battling cancer. So there are a lot of emotions involved in that. It's a lot about the boy's relationships and friendships and how his inner emotional landscape is affecting his physical world. And it's a fantastical sort of fantasy, magical realism book where he at night at 12:07 a.m. is greeted by a monstrous yew tree who says that he has been called by the boy and has come walking, and that he will tell him 3 tales, and the 4th will be the boy's, and it will be his truth that he doesn't want to say aloud. When I tell you that I have never cried more reading a book than when I did with this book, that is the God's honest truth. I was bawling. I still remembered the story, so I thought, oh, I won't be as emotionally affected knowing what happens in it. No, it got me so good. I had it myself a big sob. It just makes my heart simultaneously break and yet be full at the same time. It is sad, so it does revolve around grief is a big one. Grief and anger and love. The stories that the yew tree tells are fantastic. They're not always what they seem. And I just loved everything about it. The pace is fantastic. The characters are great. The stories that are told are beautiful and filled with, like I said, so much depth and emotion. And oh my God, it is an absolute favorite. I love and adore this book. Definitely 5 freaking stars. It's one of my all-time favorites. And I should probably purchase a copy to have in my library, even though it's not one that I would want to read often because of its intensity of feeling, but it's amazing. It's a short read, very fast too, but god damn it, like it gets me. So Monster Calls, fan-freaking-tastic. Even better the second time than the first, because reading it the second time as an older woman who's also had cancer, it just it hits in a different way. The book that I am currently reading is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I don't know when I originally read this. It would have been before Goodreads was a thing, because it's not on Goodreads. And also, I have only been faithfully updating Goodreads since starting my channel. Before then, it was anyone's guess as to which books I put on and which books I didn't bother logging. But I do know that I've read Dorian Gray. It's one that I used to read over and over again. So I did go through a big classics era in my youth, and I did actually have a physical copy of this. It was a cloth-bound edition, and I thought I'd still kept it, but it turns out the only cloth-bound classic that I kept was Alice in Wonderland. But I had every single one. Penguin did a run of these cloth-bound classics, and I had every single one of them because my ex-husband bought them all for me, which was a very generous gift. But then I went through my extreme minimalism phase and I got rid of everything pretty much that I owned, and they obviously did not survive the culling. However, so reading it this time around, this was previously rated in my head 5 stars. I remember it was one of my favorite classics of all time. Oscar Wilde is Wilde son. I feel like in this book, Lord Henry is a mouthpiece for his own personal opinions and beliefs. He was definitely a character, and unfortunately, I do believe that Oscar Wilde was incarcerated for being gay. And I believe that they used The Picture of Dorian Gray as evidence in that trial, which is just, don't even get me started. But in The Picture of Dorian Gray, it's about this extraordinarily gorgeous specimen of a man named Dorian, whose beauty is wildly admired by everyone that he comes across. Mostly his 2 friends, Basil the painter, who paints his portrait, and then Basil's friend, Lord Henry, who is, as Basil puts it, a terrible influence on people. But in this book, it's a bit of magical realism and fantasy. I'm only halfway through rereading it, but Basil paints Dorian's portrait, and Dorian laments that this portrait will never age while he has to, and how he wishes that the portrait could age in his place so that he could be forever young and beautiful. And lo and behold, that starts to happen. So the painting not only starts to show the effects of his age, but it shows the stains of his soul as Dorian sort of slips from virtue into debauchery. So I find it very easy to read. With Oscar Wilde's books, I find a lot of it is opinions. So the characters, like I said, are mouthpieces for what he believes about certain topics, whether that's beauty, youth, morality, the arts, whatever he's talking about, there is a lot of exposition and opinions brought about those topics. And I find them very thoroughly entertaining. I find Oscar Wilde's humor to be grand. I do find myself chuckling a lot while reading this. He's definitely a bit of a rascal, and I dig it. Do I think this is going to be a 5-star? No, but I think that's just because I'm not as enamored with classics as I once was, and I don't find them as inherently entertaining or written in a way that I enjoy as more contemporary novels are. So at the moment, I am skewing to a 4.5. We shall see. I'm only halfway through and things have just started to begin, so to speak. So we'll see what my opinion is at the end of it. I did enjoy the movie adaptations too of The Picture of Dorian Gray. I find Dorian Gray an interesting character in general, but we shall see how it finishes up. But today I am going out, I'm picking up an Easter egg ice cream as a surprise for my daughters for Easter. And I am then going to a little local bookstore to have a browse. I had a really fun time last time on my last outing to an independent bookstore in purchasing a random book. So I thought this time I might do the same, but I'll purchase a book that I have not heard of whatsoever. And I'm also going to take myself out for a bit of a fancy lunch. And then this evening I have the new book club. So this was the evening book club, and I am going mostly out of curiosity to see maybe if it's a different demographic. I'm hoping to find some more millennials that I can talk about books with. I love my ladies at my other book club, but I am one of the younger ones there. So we'll see what it's like. If it's the same, then I'm just going to stick with my afternoon book club with my lovely ladies and one gentleman. There's one gentleman that just recently joined, but we are discussing the conversion. So that was a 2-star read for me and a very, very boring, dull book that I didn't really enjoy. So we'll see what everyone else thought about it, but I will let you know when I return. And I did pick a book from the bookshop. This is called Bluebeard's Castle. So that is the cover. The cover piqued my interest. And then when I flipped over, it says, the debut novel from the acclaimed director of The Love Witch, which is an absolutely gorgeous film. And down the bottom, filled with dark humor and evocative imagery, Bluebeard's Castle is a subversive take on modern romance and gothic erotica. But not only that, it's got end pages. Like, how special. And I'll show you the other ones because they're on both sides. So I know since being home, I did look up its ratings and it's not greatly reviewed, but it's gorgeous and it'll remind me of this day that I went into that store and picked a random book, and I've got kind of high hopes for it. I don't know, I think it sounds great, but we'll see. I just love the artwork alone anyway. So that's the book that I picked from the bookstore. Okay, so I just finished The Picture of Dorian Gray and I'm giving it 4.5 stars. So it really is just like having, I guess, a conversation with Oscar Wilde. There's a lot of social commentary about love and beauty and youth and morality and hedonism and a sort of decaying of the soul. So I enjoyed it. I think it's well done. I wonder if it would still be my favorite classic, but I'm not about to read the other ones at the moment. It definitely differs from the movie. I've seen the movie more recently than I'd read this, and the movie definitely diverged onto a different path and had a different ending. But yeah, I still enjoyed it. So this was a pretty successful week. It turns out I still enjoy the books that I've really loved in the past. Some I loved even more, some a little bit less. But A Monster Calls is definitely my favorite read of this week and will be probably a lifelong favorite. Just crying into my pillow at night. I was, so my heart's still tender from it. But that's everything for this week. Until next time, stay wild, star child.